The view control bar in Revit is located down here at the bottom of the screen. So at the moment I'm using a scale of 1 to 100. If I click there, I can go and select a different scale, or for example, I can go to custom and create my own scale. Most of the time though, you will just use proprietary scales. So that's your scale. Now, when you're setting that scale, everything you draw here is still full size. What that scale does is it allows you to take that view, whether it be a 3D view, an elevation, a plan, and then put it onto the Revit drawing sheet later on in the project. Now we will cover that later, setting up sheets and scales and views and so on, and you'll see how simplistic it is when you're setting up those scales. As we move along the view control bar, I'm not going to click on any of these icons just yet. There's a nice little tool here, you've got your arrow buttons, and you can move along in the view like that, horizontally, and also here, vertically, up and down as well. Let's go back to those icons now. First one is detail level medium. So if I zoom in now, just using my mouse, I'll zoom in on that entrance like so. And my detail level at the moment is medium. Now I'm going to get in on that truss there and zoom in real nice and tight so I can see the detail. So the detail level right now is medium. If I change that to coarse, you'll see it looks very different. If I change that to fine, it goes into even more detail. So if I go back to medium, you'll see it change ever so slightly. What you're doing there is you're refining your view to see what it actually looks like. So most of the time you will run things at medium. That is the optimum setting, it works well with your graphics card and you can see what's going on. Okay, next icon along, visual style. Now you've got various visual style options. You've also got graphic display options. If I click on that first, you can see that you can set all the different settings for your graphic display. So you can show it as shaded, you can show edges, silhouettes, shadows, lighting, photographic exposure for rendering, and also a background. If you're rendering, you might want a nice ground, horizon, sky kind of environment, and you can save that as a view template if you wish. Let's go back to those other settings now. We've got wireframe. As you can see, it is literally wireframe, showing all the outlines as a wireframe rather than a solid. If I go to hidden line, it actually hides all the hidden lines in the model itself. And again, you can have these settings set in any type of view in Revit. I'm deliberately doing it in 3D because you get the best appreciation of what they actually do. If I go shaded, as you can see there, I've got the shaded view. That tends to be the most commonly used view. And then you've got consistent colors. So that's actually the colors of what it would look like. And then if I actually go to realistic, it thinks about it now. This is using a lot more graphics power. So you can see, look, there's a concrete floor slab there and a concrete column, and there's a steel column there. And you can see the color difference and, more importantly, the texture difference. Now, last but not least is ray trace. If I click on that one, that will take some time to think about. You can see the little arrow thing kicking in there, the Windows arrow circle that goes round. And you can see, look, it's ray tracing that gradually and making that look realistic. So this is your interactive ray trace mode. And you can see there that it will work through that and make it look as realistic as possible. The problem that you have with that is it uses up a whole shed load of a graphics card capacity. So normally what you would do there is go back to shaded. That's the one that's easy and quick because I can now pan and you can see how quickly my graphics card copes with that pan like that. Okay, other options now on the view control. We've got sun path off. We've also got shadows off. I can switch those on if I want to, but again, it takes up graphic power. Sun path, it shows you where the sun is shining and you can set where the sun is, what time, what part of the world you're in. Shadows again, showing shadows at time and location. That's the sort of thing you would do when you're actually conceptualizing and planning where the building might go. Render, here we've got show rendering dialog. If I click that now, the render dialog comes up. I'll just bring it into the screen area for you. There we go. So I'm now showing the rendering dialog box. I can leave that open on screen all the time if I want to. If I just move that over here, and I click again now like that, it switches it off again. So when I want to render one of my 3D views, I can click on that button there and it will bring up the dialog box. Now these are important ones. crop view and also crop region. Now to show you those, I'm going to go to a plan view. So we'll go to the floor view, O2. Going to double click on the wheel and do a zoom extents. Now let's have a look at those. What do they do? So do not crop the view and show crop region. So if I crop region now like that, that shows that I'm displaying all of that plan. But if I click on the edge of it now, can you see there's a dotted and a non-dotted, a continuous? So if I drag that in there like that, what'll happen is that'll crop that view like so to that point there. Now what you've also got is you've got the do not crop view. I can tell it not to crop if I want to. And also if I drag this one, this is my control. If I come out here to here like this and click like that, what it does is it actually crops the view. Any annotation goes out to that point there. So I've got those two different settings. That's the actual view, and the dotted one is the annotation, how far the annotation will show. So at the moment that annotation's fine because it's showing. But if I drag that this way and come in like that and click, it's also fine. But that's the extent of the crop view. So you've got to be careful there. So what I'll do is I'll click that and I'll drag that back this way. So we've got the whole view in there and it just shows the crop region. You can then switch that off again and you're showing the whole view again like you were before. Now here we can isolate, temporary hide or isolate. Now at the moment I haven't got anything isolated. So when I click on that, it's all grayed out. But if I just hit escape and I can select, let's say grids like that. If I right click now, you'll see I can hide in the view and I can hide the elements, that particular category, or I can filter. So if I hide the elements now, you'll notice that element has gone. So if I click on that one there, right click, hide in view and element, it hides that particular grid line. Now if I did that by category, so if I click there, right click and do a hide in view and go by category, it hides all of the grid lines like that. Now what I can do there is I can click here, temporary hide isolate, and at the moment I haven't actually got any elements selected. Let's hide those openings or maybe hide the floor. What I can do is I can select it like so, and then when I click here, obviously I can isolate, hide and so on. So if I hide that element, it hides it and now it's showing me all of the structural information underneath that floor slab. If I click again, I can reset the temporary hide isolate like so, and it comes back again. What I can also do there is I have to show the hidden information. So where do I get that hidden information from? Reveal hidden elements like so. There's all those hidden grids and things. So if I now select that one there, right click and unhide in view category, they disappear like that. I go back down here now and do that, and my grids are now back. Now obviously the individual elements that I decided to hide haven't come back. I have to do that individually. But to save time, obviously, you can see how that's done. Moving along now, I can also show my temporary view properties. So if I enable my temporary view properties, I might have some temporary views that I need to show. I don't have any in this case, so if I click there, I restore the view properties back to their default. And here as well, I've also got show analytical model. So when I click there, look, if I zoom in now, you can see, look, there's my loading point. And you can see there, as I hover over that area load, so there's my loadings for my structural floor system that I've got in place in this particular building. So the view control toolbar is very important. There's a lot of settings in there that you will use on a regular basis. As we work through the course, I will point out which ones you need to click on and which settings you need to use. Last but not least, we're going to have a look at the status bar, which is right at the bottom of your Revit structure screen. It's down here. So as you can see, click to select, tab for alternates, control adds, shift unselects. So it's giving you little prompts here on the bottom left corner of the screen. Now here, when you're using work sets and work sharing, working on a common model and different parts of a project simultaneously, if I click there, I can enable work sharing and enable the grids, the work sets and so on. Now I'm not doing that in this case. I'm working locally on my laptop. But if I was working in a server client environment, I would set those settings on my status bar in Revit itself. I'll just cancel that now. So all of those views there would show up in this pull down menu here. Now, as I move along, there's also this little button here, Design Options. So if I click there, let me just bring that centrally into the screen for you. I'm now editing the main model, and as you can see, I can select option sets. So I can set a new option set, and that can be option 1 primary, secondary, and so on. I can edit the selected, I can click on it there, I can also delete it if I want to, I can remove it, edit it, and so on. Now, I'm not going to use it, so I'm just going to close that. I'm not going to worry about any of the settings, but what I can do there is I can have a main model, an option 1, and so on, and I can have different types of parts of the model. At the moment, I've just got main model, that's it. So I'm going to exclude the options there if I untick that, and I can set the options for each part of the model. Now, at the moment, some of the models we're using are very simplistic, so I don't need to worry about the settings. But what I could do here is obviously go in and set something. If I select that like that, there it is there, option 1 primary, I can remove it if I need to. Now, obviously, those settings there are based on what you're working on, the size of project you're working on, and whether that project is broken into component sub-projects. Like you've got the main model, you might have the underground model, for example, you might have a basement. That might be another part of your model, and it might be a secondary part of your model. Over here on the right on the status bar, you've got select links, so you can select the links and their elements. So you might have a linked file. So you might be linking to another Revit file somewhere, a project file, a family file. Moving along here as well, underlay elements. So you can select the elements in the underlay of a view. To avoid accidentally selecting those underlay elements, you can disable it. Now here as well, I can select pinned elements. So it's allowing me to select pinned elements that are locked in place. A pinned element is locked in place and it's centralized so that you might not want to move it. It might be a floor slab that has to be fixed in position over a structural flooring system. And here you can select elements by face. So if you're working in an elevation, you might want to click in the middle of a wall or something along those lines. So I can switch these on and off at any time. So as you can see, it's got a red cross on it now. That means it's off. Click on it again, it's on. And it's the same here with drag elements on selection. I can switch that off and I can switch that on. And they're just settings in your status bar that allow you to work in Revit Structure effectively and cleanly when you're working with complex structures. Because Revit Structure is a multi-discipline product now, and you can display architectural, structural or MEP or systems information, you get different samples in the Revit welcome screen. So I'm using the architectural sample to show you how to zoom and pan in Revit Structure. Now I know that sounds a little bit sort of round the wrong way, but the reason I'm using the architectural model is it actually shows you the effects of the zooming and panning very, very well. So that's why I've used it. You wouldn't normally use this type of model in Revit Structure, but I'm using it just to emphasize a point in this particular case. So let's have a look now at zooming and panning using this particular Revit project. Now you'll notice it's a house with a balcony and there's some doors and there's some windows. All of those are family components. Now obviously you would have a structure behind that as well, and you would use Revit Structure on this model, but perhaps not in as much depth as the architectural components are, as you can see in the model at the moment. So let's have a look at zooming and panning. As I move my mouse, you can see the pointer moving around in the drawing area. Now, if I just position my pointer over those doors there, obviously they're going to highlight. It's going to highlight those particular components in the model there in the project. But if I roll up on my 3-button mouse using the wheel, I'm just using a standard 3-button mouse. So that's left button, right button, and a wheel that acts as a button as well. And as I roll up on the wheel there, I'm zooming in, and as you can see, there's more detail there on the model. If I roll back on the wheel now, you'll notice I'm zooming out. So that is how you zoom in and out using just a standard mouse on Revit Structure. If I hold down the wheel as a button, watch what happens. A little cross appears, and I can zoom and pan both left and right, and up and down. So wherever I am in the model in the project, I can obviously zoom with the wheel up and down, but I can also pan. This is very useful when I'm looking at detailed information. So if I move over here to this balcony, I'm looking at that handrail there. If I roll up on the wheel now, you'll see that I'm zooming in nice and close on the railings there like that. I might get a little bit too close though. So what I do is I hold down the wheel and I can pan, and I can keep panning. I can move the pointer when I release the wheel and pan again until I find the detail I want. And then as you can see, as I move around now, I can highlight in much more detail. I can roll back on the wheel a couple of notches, show some more detail, and I can hover over those doors, for example, there. Now you'll notice a lot of blue flashing there. That's the highlighting as I move across each component. Don't be fazed by that. You're not selecting anything. It's just Revit saying, hey, these components are here. So there's a column there, fireplace I can even see. And as I move around, all the components are starting to highlight. I can zoom in real tight though to a connection like this. As I pan, there's that connection. If I hover over it, it highlights. And there's my railing, as you can see, fixed to the balcony there. Now, there's one more function on the wheel, on the mouse, that is very, very cool. I'm zoomed in real close, as you can see, but if I just double click on the wheel as a button, it does a zoom extent and zooms me out to the extent of the Revit model in the project. Very, very useful when you're zoomed in way too far and you don't know where you are in your model, in your Revit project. So that's zooming and panning. Now there are other ways of zooming and panning, but I will come onto those a little bit later on. Welcome to this Infinite Skills Revit Structure video training course. As you can see on the screen, we have Revit open. Now, one of the things with the newer versions of Autodesk Revit is the ability to flick between each different flavor of Revit. You don't have to have 3 different Revit installations anymore. So what you've got at the top of the screen here, you can see architecture, structure, systems, and so on. We're going to be using the structure tab predominantly because this is a Revit structure course. So let's have a look at Revit structure. There's a sample structure project here. So let's just click on that now, and that'll take us to the sample RVT file, which is a Revit project file. Very different from products such as AutoCAD, which use drawings. When you're working with Revit, you work with projects. Now you'll notice it's a one-time upgrade process only. It's upgrading the Revit project to the latest version of Revit. It will do that automatically if you've got a project that's been created in a previous version. So you don't have to worry about any upgrade processes. It does it all for you. So here is Revit. As you can see, there's a Revit structure on the screen. And as I move around now, you can see there's things like shaft openings, and I can highlight each component in the Revit model in the project. Now, obviously, we'll go into all of that in a lot more detail in the course, but you can see how complicated the Revit screen looks. You have the Autodesk ribbon at the top here, so you still have the tabs. There's the structure tab that we will be using as we work through this course, but you'll notice there's some areas of the screen that you may not be familiar with, such as the properties palette here on the left and the project browser just below it. So let's have a look now at Revit structure and work our way through the product so that we can develop models and work with building information modeling. So let's go back now to viewing in 3D. I'm still in my 2D plan view, which is here in the project browser, O2 Floor. Let's go and have a look now at working in 3D when we're viewing. Now I have covered this in the zooming and the panning, and we looked at zooming and panning in 3D. Now, I've showed you how to zoom and pan in 2D, so let's go back to the 3D view here. I'll just double click like so. Now we've got a standard 3D view there, but I haven't showed you some neat little 3D tools that you can use when you're viewing in 3D. Obviously you've got the standard zoom tools. So for example, there's a floor there just over the entrance to the building. You see it highlighting there. So if I actually roll up on the wheel and zoom in, still viewing in 3D perfectly well, and I can also hold down the wheel and pan across a little bit. But I can't really see that 3D view in much detail. So what I can do in 3D is if I hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, see the little minus sign come up when I do that on the pointer? And then I hold down the wheel, the central wheel on my mouse. I'm just using a standard 3-button mouse. Left button, right button, and the wheel acting as a button. So if I hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, hold down the wheel, there's the pan. But as I pan, it doesn't just pan, does it? It's got a funny little symbol there. So what I can do is I can orbit. It thinks it's going to pan, but because I've got the Shift key held down, it's a different input. So I can move around, and if I just zoom out now, so I can see the whole model again, and I'll pan upwards a little bit as well, like so. I can actually orbit in my model by holding down Shift and then holding down the wheel on the mouse. And as I move the mouse, can you see I'm orbiting round? I can orbit up, I can orbit down, like so. Release the mouse, release the Shift key. I'll come round here again, hold down the Shift key, hold down the wheel on the mouse, and just orbit upwards a little bit like that and bring that round. And then as I zoom in now, I've got a much better view of that entrance area and the columns holding up that floor there. So you can see my steel columns are there, and I've got a much better view of them because I've done that orbit and I'm viewing in 3D. Now there's lots of ways and means that you can view in 3D, and we're going to look at those in a bit more detail. But what I do suggest you consider buying and making an investment in is what they call a space mouse or a space pilot. They're by a company called 3D Connection, which is 3, the number, and then D, and Connection is spelt CONNEXION. So it's 3D Connection, all one word, .com. Go and have a look at their website. They provide some fantastic space mice and space pilots for 3D work, and they act like a joystick and allow you to navigate your 3D model when you're viewing in 3D. They have a particular Revit driver as well, so they all work with Revit, they work with other 3D products as well. But the idea being, when you're in Revit, it's a lot easier to use something like a space mouse or a space pilot to navigate. Holding down that Shift and that mouse button does take a bit of getting used to. And if you've just got a separate mouse to the left of you, if you're right-handed like me, and then you've got your regular mouse on the right, you can navigate much more quickly. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that right now because it involves plugging all the space pilot mouse and everything in, which I don't want to confuse you with. All I want to show you is holding down the Shift key and then holding down the wheel on your regular mouse and orbiting like that at the moment. But have a look at those 3D Connection space pilots and space mice. They're a good investment if you're going to be using Revit 24/7, 7 days a week in the office, cranking out your Revit structures.